Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The hum of the projector filled the tent, blending with the slow, restless rhythm of boots scuffing dust off the floor. 12 men leaned over a map glowing with red and blue markers, their eyes sharp, voices overlapping, and in the middle of it all, Staff Sergeant Brin sat in silence, her hands clasped loosely over a weathered notebook. No one asked for her input. No one even looked her way. She had learned not to expect it. The captain leading the briefing was young, neat, and proud, the kind of officer who believed confidence could substitute for combat. His nameplate read Dominic, and his polished uniform looked like it had never touched dirt. He pointed at coordinates, talked about angles of approach, and paused only to adjust his sleeves like a man performing for an audience. "Sniper coverage will be handled by Sergeant Timmons," he announced. "He's got range certification and—" Brin didn't look up. She already knew what that meant. Not her again. Someone chuckled under their breath. She couldn't tell who, but she caught the sideways glance, that familiar expression of doubt dressed up as amusement. The same look she'd been getting since the day she'd arrived in country. Outside, the late afternoon light turned the desert into a pale ocean of sand. Inside, it smelled of sweat, dust, and instant coffee. The projector buzzed, flickered, then dimmed. The meeting broke up in a clatter of folding chairs. Brin closed her notebook quietly and stood. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She learned it only led to more talking, the kind that left bruises without hands. "Staff Sergeant Keller," a voice called. She turned. Captain Dominic stood near the door, his posture crisp, chin raised. He had that faint smirk that some men wore when they thought they were being kind. "Yes, sir." He gestured at the range bag slung over her shoulder. "You shoot much?" Brin blinked. The question didn't make sense. "That's my MOS, sir." He smiled, a teacher humoring a student. "Right, of course. Well, I did competitive rifle in college, national circuit. Maybe I could give you a few pointers." There was a small pause. The air seemed to thicken around them. One of the lieutenants passing by caught the exchange and slowed down just enough to listen. Brin's hand tightened on the strap of her bag. "That's generous of you, sir. Thank you." Dominic nodded, clearly pleased with himself. "We'll start next week. I think you'll pick it up quick." And just like that, the conversation ended, casual for him, unforgettable for her. As she walked out into the open heat, the words echoed in her mind. "Let me teach you to shoot." A man who had never seen combat. A man who had no idea that in her logbook there were 37 confirmed kills, every one of them verified by a spotter. 37 times she had pulled the trigger, 37 lives ended before they could take another American. 37 shots that no one talked about. She didn't correct him. She never did. Silence had become her armor, thin, fragile, but reliable. Camp Leatherneck stretched out across the helm in dust like a tired machine. Rows of tents shimmered in the heat haze. Convoys rumbled through, raising veils of tan grit that hung in the air like ghosts. She passed a group of Marines loading crates, their laughter cutting through the dry wind. One of them looked up as she walked by, squinting at her name tape. "Keller," he said, "you that sniper the captain's training." She paused, not answering right away. Then, "That's what they say." He grinned. "Good luck with that, ma'am." The laughter followed her as she walked away. It wasn't cruel, just careless, the kind that stings more because it's not meant to. Inside her tent, she dropped the range bag onto the cot and sat down. The air smelled of canvas and oil. She pulled the old data book from her pack, the one her grandfather had given her. It wasn't regulation, just a leather-bound log filled with years of handwritten notes, wind charts, distances, sketches of terrain. And tucked inside, folded so many times it had gone soft around the edges, was a single piece of paper. 14. Her grandfather's handwriting, faded pencil marks. His confirmed kill count from Chasen Reservoir, 1950. He'd been a Marine sniper, one of the first to teach her what precision meant, not the loud kind, not the cinematic kind, but the quiet, patient kind that lived in breath control and heartbeat rhythm. She ran her thumb over the number. He had told her once, the best snipers are the ones nobody sees coming. She built her entire life around that truth. Outside, a black hawk passed overhead, rotor wash shaking the tent walls. Brin closed her eyes. The vibration hummed in her chest. The noise was comforting in a strange way, proof that something bigger than her was still moving. She thought about Wyoming, the ranch, the smell of sage after rain, the sound of her grandfather's old M1 Garand cracking against the empty sky. She'd been 16 when she made her first 400-yard shot, iron sights only. He hadn't said much, just nodded once as if to say, that's the way. He died before he ever saw her in uniform. Lung failure, old wounds that never healed. The night before the funeral, she sat on the porch and read the note again. 14. It wasn't a competition, but somehow it had become a compass. Now, years later, she'd tripled that number quietly, efficiently, and without a single citation that stuck. She didn't care about medals. What hurt was how easily people forgot. 3 days after Dominic's remark, the whispers had spread through the camp. The new captain's teaching the girl sniper how to shoot. No one said it to her face. They didn't have to. She could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she walked by, in the way mission rosters skipped over her name. When sniper assets were requested, someone always picked someone else. The radio chatter never included her call sign anymore. At the range, she watched younger soldiers miss targets she could have hit blindfolded. She didn't correct them. She didn't even watch through the scope. She just logged data, kept her notes clean, and waited. It was easier that way. Easier than fighting a system that heard only the loudest voices. That night, as the camp quieted, she lay on her cot staring at the faint shadow of the tent ceiling. Somewhere out there, men were fighting, dying, making headlines. She'd been in the thick of it before. Kandahar coast, dusty ridges with no names. Her first deployment had been a blur of adrenaline and dust. She worked with rangers back then, paired with a spotter named Ortiz. He was loud, funny, the opposite of her, but when they went out on Overwatch, silence was their shared language. 19 confirmed kills in 6 months. All clean, all verified. Ortiz had submitted a commendation. Battalion sent it back marked insufficient corroboration. No explanation, just a polite dismissal. That was the moment she learned. In this world, some records stayed invisible. A sharp crack outside pulled her back. A vehicle door slammed. Someone laughed near the mess hall. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But beneath them, her body was always listening for mortars, for whistles, for anything that didn't belong. The kind of vigilance you never unlearn. She sat up and reached for the Garand's paper again, tracing the pencil lines like a ritual. 14. Her grandfather would have laughed at the idea of a man like Dominic teaching her. He'd have said, "Let them talk, kid. Talking don't hit targets." So she let them talk. The next morning she woke before dawn. The horizon was still dark when she headed for the observation post overlooking the training range. She moved quietly through the base, past the line of MRAPs coated in dust, past the sleeping tents. The cold before sunrise bit into her skin, and she liked it, the way it kept her awake, grounded. She set up her rifle, an M2010 she'd modified herself, adjusted trigger weight, hand-lapped barrel, re-zeroed scope to perfection. The rifle fit her like memory. Through the scope, she could see the silhouettes of targets stretching into the distance. 300, 600, 1,000 meters. She chambered a round and waited. When the sun broke over the horizon, she fired once. The steel plate at 1,000 meters rang like a bell. Clean, precise. She didn't fire again, she didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Captain Dominic stopped by the range. He carried a clipboard, looked official. "You get some practice in, Keller." "Yes, sir." He nodded, pretending not to notice the single bullet hole dead center on the furthest plate. "Good, keep at it." She just smiled. "Will do, sir." And for a moment she felt something almost like amusement. Almost. 3 weeks passed. She kept her head down, her trigger finger idle. The missions kept coming and going without her name attached. Until one morning, an operations officer showed up outside her tent holding a folder. "Staff Sergeant Keller." She stood, saluting automatically. "Yes, sir." He looked uncomfortable, like a man who'd realized he'd made a mistake too late. "I was reviewing files for a special request. SEAL Task Unit operating north of here. They asked for the best precision shooter available, no politics, no preferences." He opened the folder. "You mind telling me why your record looks like this?" She stayed quiet. He stared at the pages again, range scores, after-action reports, kill logs. The numbers didn't lie. 37 confirmed, dozens more unverified. He lowered the paper slowly. "Why didn't you say anything?" Her answer was soft, almost lost in the wind. "Nobody asked, sir." That night she sat outside her tent with her grandfather's paper in her hands again. The edges had worn thin. The pencil marks had almost disappeared. 14. She thought of him, the old Marine who taught her everything she knew about patience, about waiting for the right shot, about how silence could be louder than any report. She thought about the laughter in the tent, the whispers, the smirk on Captain Dominic's face. But she wasn't angry. Anger burned too fast. She needed her fire to last. Tomorrow, she'd be flying north to link up with a Navy SEAL unit. A mission with no politics, no second-guessing. A mission that might finally remind her what all those years of silence had been for. She looked out across the camp. The horizon was painted in the last colors of daylight, dusk glowing gold under the setting sun. Somewhere, a generator hummed. Somewhere, a man who thought she couldn't shoot was preparing for another briefing. Brin folded the paper, slid it into her pocket, and whispered, "Let's see what they say tomorrow." The wind carried the words away. But for the first time in months, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of certainty. Because tomorrow, someone was finally going to see what she could do. The helicopter shook hard enough to rattle the teeth in her skull. Brin sat strapped in near the rear hatch, helmet on, eyes fixed on the fatting horizon. The world below her was a blur of rock and dust, ridgelines and shadowed valleys passing beneath the spinning rotors. The air inside the cabin smelled of hydraulic oil, sweat, and faint traces of cordite that never quite washed out. Her rifle case was wedged between her boots. She kept one hand on it the whole flight. No one said much. The SEALs in the cabin, 6 of them, were silent professionals, their eyes hidden behind tinted goggles. They looked comfortable in the noise, comfortable in the unknown. She wondered if any of them knew who she was or if she was just another name added to the roster. The crew chief leaned close to yell over the engines, "10 mics out." She nodded, though he couldn't see her expression behind the visor. She'd been on dozens of flights like this. The air always carried that same mix of anticipation and fatigue, the knowing that someone, somewhere on the ground, was going to die before sunrise. But this time was different. This wasn't just another mission. This was her chance to disappear and reappear as something undeniable. She looked at her watch, 0540. The first light was already streaking across the desert like thin fire. She thought about the officer back at Leatherneck who'd handed her the orders, the confusion in his eyes when he'd read her record aloud. 37 confirmed. He sounded like he was reading a mistake. She just nodded. He had no idea how much patience it took to earn those numbers, how much silence. The pilot's voice came through the headset. "Approaching patrol base, hold on." The Black Hawk dropped suddenly, banking left, the landscape tilting until she could see the horizon roll sideways. Then, a thud as skids met gravel. The side door slid open. Hot wind and rotor wash hit her face like a slap. A man waited near the landing pad, tall, lean, with gray at the temples. Even from a distance, he radiated command. She'd seen that kind of calm before, the kind that didn't need volume to control a room. As she stepped off the bird, her boots sinking into the dust, he nodded once. "You Keller," his voice carried through the wind. "Yes, sir." He extended a hand. "Vincent Shaw, Captain, U.S. Navy." She shook it, firm but not forced. He studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something he didn't quite believe. Then he said quietly, "I read your file. 37 confirmed enemy KIA. That number real?" "Yes, sir. Personal log, verified by spotter statements and after-action reports." He nodded again. "Good, come with me." She followed him through the camp, smaller than Leatherneck, quieter, the kind of place that ran on necessity, not ceremony. Men moved with purpose. No wasted steps. A radio crackled somewhere, low voices speaking in short bursts of code. Inside the operations tent, a large map spread across a table under a dim red light. Shaw pointed at a square of terrain marked in black grease pencil. "Our target, here, Haqqani, Taliban financier. Coordinates confirmed by ISR. He's moving between safe houses, but we've got a 12-hour window before he relocates again." Brin studied the topography. Open ground, sparse cover, wind channels through the valley, a ridge line roughly 1,800 meters out, high enough for a clean shot if the weather held. Difficult but not impossible. One of the SEALs standing nearby, a lieutenant commander with a sharp jawline and skeptical eyes, crossed his arms. "She's Army," he said flatly. Shaw didn't even look up. "She's the best shooter in theater, that's all that matters." The lieutenant commander said nothing more. Brin leaned over the map, tracing the wind lines with a finger. "Elevation correction will be heavy," she murmured. "We'll need a solid spotter. Who's calling wind?" "Wren," Shaw said. "He's done extreme range work before." She nodded. That was good. She hated having to explain her rhythm to someone new. Spotting wasn't about math alone, it was trust, timing, breath. Shaw watched her think, his expression unreadable. "We step off at 0400. You've got the shot, single engagement. We get one chance before he's gone." "Understood." He handed her a folder. Inside were satellite stills, timestamps, and a printed authorization, engagement authority approved. "Command wants him gone. Don't miss." Brin closed the folder gently. "I won't." That night sleep didn't come easy. The cot was rough, the tent colder than expected, but it wasn't the discomfort that kept her awake, it was the weight of recognition. She had spent months being invisible, unseen, dismissed. Now suddenly someone saw her, and that made the silence heavier. She sat up, pulling the Guerin paper from her chest pocket. The pencil marks were nearly erased now, but she could still see the faint 14. Her grandfather's number. She thought of his voice, raspy, full of quiet pride. "You're better than trying, I can tell." The memory came like a heartbeat. At 300, someone tapped on her tent pole. "Keller, step time." She geared up in silence. Her rifle, custom M2010 chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, gleamed faintly under the lantern light. The bolt slid smooth, oiled, perfect. She slung it over her shoulder, grabbed her pack, and stepped into the chill air. The convoy was waiting, one MRAP, one Polaris, both dark and silent. The stars overhead burned like glass. They moved out just before dawn. No chatter, no radio noise. The valley stretched endless in front of them, the ridgeline like a sleeping giant against the lightening sky. By the time they reached the base of the slope, the first blush of sunlight touched the rocks. They began the climb, slow and deliberate, each footfall measured. Loose gravel slid under boots. Breathing became controlled, metered. She led the way the last 200 meters, choosing a path that wouldn't silhouette them against the skyline. When they finally reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The compound below sat quiet, walled, distant, a toy model of war in a desert of silence. Wren unfolded the spotting scope, adjusted it. "Range, 1,830 meters, he whispered. "Wind variable, shifting left to right 4 to 6. Brin nodded, setting her bipod, settling into prone position. The rifle felt like an extension of her own body, every movement rehearsed, every muscle quiet. She entered data into the handheld kestrel: temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, altitude. The ballistic computer hummed softly. Elevation 28.4 MOA. Windage, call it 1.2 left. Got it. Through her scope the compound shimmered in morning haze. Then movement. A man stepping into sunlight, tan jacket, tall, walking toward a parked vehicle. Target mobile, the radio whispered. Brin exhaled, her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied. 3 left, hold. Ren's voice was calm, practiced. She adjusted, crosshairs hovered center mass. Time stretched thin. The world narrowed to a single breath, a single squeeze. She pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked, but she stayed in the scope, watching the round's invisible arc play out over 3 long seconds. Then, impact. The man dropped instantly. Center mass, clean. Target down, confirmed, Ren murmured into the mic. Through the haze, Brin saw figures scatter. Alarms, chaos, but none of it reached her. Her mind stayed in that perfect stillness between trigger and result. Behind her, Captain Shaw lowered his binoculars. That was perfect, he said quietly. She cleared the rifle, chamber open. Thank you, sir. He crouched beside her. Tell me something, Keller. Why the hell have you been sitting on a bench for 2 weeks? She didn't look at him. Because people see what they expect to see, sir. He was silent for a moment, then said softly, not anymore. They stayed on the ridge until the drone feed confirmed extraction was clear. Then they packed up and began the long hike down. The valley wind picked up, whispering through the rocks. Ren broke the silence. That was a hell of a shot. Never seen someone ride wind shifts like that before. Brin just smiled faintly. Wind's just math in motion. He chuckled, math with bullets. Back at base, the radio room was alive. Word spread fast, a perfect long shot, verified by ISR. Shaw's name came up, then hers. By noon, even the cooks were whispering about the Army sniper who'd made a kill at nearly 2 clicks. When Shaw called the operations staff together, Brin assumed it was a debrief. But when she stepped inside the tent, she froze. Captain Dominic was there. So was the officer who'd passed her over on every sniper tasking. Shaw didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid Brin's file on the table and opened it. Let's go through this, he said calmly. Every kill, every range, every qualification. He spoke slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the numbers fill the air. Then he set down a stack of photos, ISR stills, after-action confirmations, spotter statements, evidence, proof. Finally, he looked at Dominic. You offered to teach her to shoot. Dominic's face flushed. Sir, I. Shaw cut him off. She's got 37 confirmed kills. You've got 0. Next time you want to teach someone something, make sure you know more than they do. The silence in the tent was deafening. Brin didn't say a word. She just stood there, hands behind her back, eyes steady. Shaw turned to her. From this day forward, you're attached to my task unit. No one benches you again. Understood? Yes, sir. As she walked out, she didn't look back. The sky above the compound was burning gold in the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a novelty, not as a name on a roster, but as what she truly was, a shooter who didn't miss. Later that night, as she cleaned her rifle, she thought about what had happened in that tent. She didn't feel vindicated. She didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than any argument could. In this world, respect wasn't given. It was earned quietly, one shot at a time. She folded her grandfather's paper, slipped it back into her pocket, and whispered to the empty room, 14 and 43. I hope you're proud. The desert wind pressed against the tent flap, carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere far off. Maybe the men still didn't understand what she'd done. Maybe they never would. but somewhere out there in the stillness between breaths, a lesson hung unspoken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why was she still awake when everyone else slept? The base had gone quiet hours ago. The desert wind whispered against the canvas walls like a soft reminder that silence could be its own kind of company. Brin Keller sat cross-legged beside her rifle case, oiling the bolt with slow, deliberate strokes. Each movement was ritual, controlled, necessary. Sleep would have been easier, but easy things never taught her much. Outside, a generator droned low, rhythmic. Beyond it, the vast black of Afghanistan stretched infinite and still. She could smell dust in the air, dry, ancient, stubborn, and somehow it grounded her. Every base, every mission, every sunrise out here smelled the same, like metal and earth and waiting. She looked at her hands. Scar lines, faint burns, the ghosts of rifle barrels and long watches. Every mark told a story she didn't talk about. People thought shooters carried death in their rifles. But it was the waiting that haunted her more, the endless, quiet hours between decision and consequence. There was a knock at her tent post. "Doors open," she said softly. Captain Vincent Shaw stepped inside, still in his gear, a mug of black coffee in one hand. "You're up late." "So are you." He smiled faintly, setting the mug down beside her. "Couldn't sleep. The colonel in Bagram wants updates before dawn. Bureaucracy doesn't sleep either." She smirked. "Sounds familiar." He studied her rifle laid out in perfect pieces. "You keep it cleaner than most men keep their souls." "Rifles don't lie to you," she said. "They do exactly what you make them do." He sat down opposite her, cross-legged, no pretense of rank. Just two soldiers in the dark. "You know, when I pulled your file, I thought there had to be a mistake. I've seen shooters with 10 confirmed get written up for silver stars. 37 and not a single decoration attached. That's not oversight, that's blindness." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "People see what they want, sir. I learned that early." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You remind me of someone I knew years ago, Ranger Sniper, quiet as death. Nobody noticed him until the one day they needed him most. Afterward, everyone pretended they'd always believed." Brin smiled, just barely. "Did he make it home?" "No," Shaw said softly. "But he died knowing he did what he came to do. That's something." They sat in silence a moment longer, both watching the desert beyond the half-open flap. Finally, Shaw stood. "We're heading back out tomorrow. ISR picked up chatter near Musakala. Possible retribution strike after Haqqani. I want you on overwatch." "Copy that." He turned to leave, then paused. "Keller." "Yes, sir." He smiled faintly. "That shot, the one you made yesterday, I've seen a lot of shooters, but that was art. Don't let anyone take that from you." When he left, Brin sat there for a long time, staring at the rifle. She wasn't used to compliments. They felt heavier than criticism somehow. Compliments meant expectation. Expectation meant pressure. And pressure meant less margin for silence. Still, a part of her, the quiet, hidden part that still needed to be seen, felt a flicker of warmth. It wasn't pride, just acknowledgement, a reminder that she wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning came cold. Gray sky, thin light. The base stirred slow, men zipping gear, checking mags, passing quiet words. Brin moved through them like a shadow, loading her pack, double-checking her optics. Wren handed her a small weather station device and grinned. "Wind's gonna dance today. I'll call it best I can." She nodded. "We'll make it work." They loaded up into two vehicles, Shaw in the lead, Brin and Wren in the rear Polaris. The route was rough, full of ruts and hidden rocks, but Brin barely noticed the bumps. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, scanning terrain out of habit. Every ridge, every dip in the land told a story of movement. Out here, reading ground was like reading intent. "Still can't believe the brass benched you," Wren said over the noise. "People back at HQ act like shooters grow on trees." Brin shrugged. Invisible people make convenient targets and excuses. He laughed, not anymore. The convoy slowed near a dry riverbed. Shaw raised his hand, signaling halt. Through the dust, Brin saw what he was looking at, a small compound, mud walls, half-collapsed roof. Smoke curled faintly from a distant chimney. Too quiet, too still. Shaw keyed his mic. ISR confirms movement inside. 2 possibles. No heat signatures beyond. Keller, you're on overwatch. We'll recon from below. Copy that. She and Wren broke off, scaling a low rise overlooking the compound. It wasn't high, barely 600 meters of elevation, but it gave a clean angle on the approach. She set up the bipod, checked range. 920 meters. Manageable. The wind, though, that was trickier. It shifted erratically across the open basin, like invisible fingers stirring dust. Wind's teasing, Wren murmured. 4 right now, 2 now, back again. You seeing that shimmer? I see it. They watched. Through the scope she could see the compound door half open, moving slightly in the wind. Shadows shifted inside. Her radio clicked, Shaw's voice. Advancing, hold overwatch. Copy, holding. Minutes passed. Sweat rolled down her neck despite the chill. Waiting was the hardest part. It was a test of patience, not skill. Anyone could pull a trigger. Few could hold still long enough to know when not to. Suddenly, movement. A figure appeared in the doorway, armed, scanning the ridge. Brin's finger found the trigger well, not pressing, just ready. Got eyes, she whispered. Wren adjusted his scope. Hostile, AK platform, he's alert. Range. 918. Wind. Hold 2 right. She exhaled slowly, body melting into the ground. The crosshairs steadied. Send it when ready. But she didn't fire, not yet. Something about the way the man moved, cautious, deliberate, told her he wasn't alone. She shifted her view slightly, scanning the corners. There, another figure higher on the wall, rifle slung low, waiting to draw them in. 2 hostiles, she whispered. Ambush posture, tell Shaw to pull back 50 meters. Wren relayed. Seconds later, Shaw's acknowledgement came through, tight and professional. Good catch, Keller. The team repositioned quietly. The ambush never triggered. Eventually, both figures slipped back inside the compound, unaware they'd been seen. When Shaw regrouped later, he walked straight up to Brin. You saved us from walking into a kill box, he said. How'd you spot that? She shrugged. They were too patient. Nobody stands that still unless they're waiting for something. He smiled. Remind me never to play poker with you. The mission extended into a long afternoon of recon and exfil. No shots fired. No medals earned. But for Brin, it felt like something more valuable, trust forming in quiet layers, like sediment settling after years of turbulence. That night, as they returned to base, Wren clapped her shoulder. You ever think of instructing? Teaching. Yeah, there's a lot of kids who could learn from you. She smiled faintly. I've been offered lessons before, didn't go great. He laughed, understanding the joke, but there was weight behind her words. The memory of Captain Dominic's smirk still flickered like a bad echo. Yet now, it didn't sting as much. Time and truth had a way of dulling arrogance. Later in the ops tent, Shaw debriefed the team. No contact, no losses. Intel confirmed target relocated 2 days prior. We'll pick up his trail again soon. Good work out there. Then, turning to Brin, exceptional spotting under pressure. Just doing my job, sir. He gave her a look. You do it better than most. When the others filed out, Brin lingered. Permission to speak freely, sir. Always. She hesitated. You said earlier, you thought my file was wrong. It was, but maybe it should have been. He frowned. What do you mean? She looked down at her hands, the scars, the fine tremor in her right index finger. People look at numbers like they mean glory, but every one of those kills, it's not just math, it's memory. Sometimes it's a child who stepped too close to the wrong house. Sometimes it's a man who thought he had 10 more seconds to breathe. I've carried all of them longer than my rifle." Shaw didn't interrupt, he just let her speak. "When I stopped getting assigned, I thought maybe it was a blessing. Maybe someone up there decided I'd done enough." The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, Shaw said quietly, "I understand, but sometimes it's not about numbers. It's about the people still breathing because you were there." She nodded slowly. "I know, it just doesn't always feel like enough." He stood, placed a hand on her shoulder. "The ones who question it are the ones I trust most." When he left, she sat for a long time, listening to the hum of the generator outside. That hum reminded her of Wyoming nights, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of barn doors. Home. A word that had started to lose meaning somewhere between deployments. She pulled the paper from her pocket again. 14. The pencil lines were smudged beyond repair now. She smiled faintly. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. The number had done its job. It had guided her through the noise. A single tear welled at the corner of her eye. Not sadness, just release. Because in that moment, she realized something her grandfather probably knew all along. That silence could be a kind of peace, not punishment. She folded the paper one last time and slipped it away. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling dust across the camp. Somewhere, laughter echoed, rough, genuine, human. The kind of sound that reminded her that not everything in war was lost to the noise. She leaned back, eyes closing, the night cool against her skin. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another ridge, another choice. But for now, she let herself rest in the only safety she trusted, the kind built from solitude and self-knowledge. Because sometimes, survival wasn't about how fast you could fire. It was about how long you could stay still without losing yourself. And for Brin Keller, silence wasn't the absence of strength. It was the proof of it. Why was her name on the board again? Brin stood in the doorway of the operations tent, the morning sun cutting a hard line across her face. On the mission board, written in neat block letters beside a red marker, was her call sign, Viper 2-1, the first slot, lead shooter. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of a projector. Maps covered the table, terrain scans, route overlays, ISR stills from drones circling far above. Captain Vincent Shaw stood at the head, calm as always, one hand resting on the map. "Intel confirmed," he said. "The insurgent cell regrouped in the northern sector near Sangin. They're expecting retaliation for Haqqani, but they're not expecting us." His gaze swept the room, then it landed on her. "Keller takes over watch." A few of the SEALs nodded without comment. No skepticism this time, no second glances, just quiet acceptance. Brin gave a small nod in return. "What's the rain?" Preliminary read, 1,400 meters, compound elevations low. You'll have the high ground. Wren, her spotter, was flipping through a weather chart. Crosswinds from the east, unpredictable gusts in the afternoons. "Then we shoot in the morning," she said. Shaw smiled faintly. "You tell me when, Sergeant. We move when you're ready." That simple sentence landed heavier than it should have. It wasn't just trust, it was responsibility, command of timing, control of when lives would move and stop. As the briefing wrapped, Shaw caught her near the exit. "You good with this?" She nodded, "Yes, sir." He studied her face. "You look tired." "I don't sleep much before missions." He hesitated. "You ever talk to anyone about the other stuff?" "The other stuff?" "The weight." She shook her head. "Talking doesn't make it lighter." He sighed softly. "Maybe not, but sometimes it reminds you it's not yours alone." She didn't answer, just saluted, then walked out into the harsh Afghan daylight, the conversation lingering in her chest. By the time dawn cracked the next morning, the convoy was already on the move, 2 Humvees, one light Polaris, rolling silent along a dried wadi. The desert stretched endless, The kind of open nothing that could make you feel both infinite and trapped. Brin sat in the rear, helmet visor down, rifle resting upright between her knees. Wren sat beside her, chewing gum like it kept him grounded. "You ever think about what you'll do when this is over?" he asked. She smiled faintly under the helmet. "What makes you think it ever ends?" "Come on, when you're stateside again." "I don't know, Wyoming maybe. My family had land there once." "You got anyone waiting?" She hesitated. "No, not really." He grinned. "Same, guess we're all married to the noise." She glanced out the window. The ridgeline was getting closer now, a thin scar of stone against the horizon. "Noise ends," she murmured. "Silence doesn't." He didn't ask what she meant. They reached the drop point just before sunrise. The desert air was razor-sharp, the sky a pale blue washed with dust. Brin and Wren moved uphill, slow and deliberate, their packs cutting into their shoulders. Every crunch of gravel felt louder than it should. By the time they reached the overwatch position, the sun had just started painting the valley in gold. Brin unpacked her rifle, checked chamber, optics, bipod angle. Wren set up beside her with the spotting scope. "Range 1,420, he whispered. "Wind." 3 left, shifting 2 right intermittently. She nodded. "Copy." The compound below was small, 2 mud structures, a dirt courtyard, a water tank beside a rusted truck. Through the haze she could make out figures moving. Weapons glinted in the light. Then something different. A woman stepped into the courtyard, headscarf, long robe, carrying a jug. Wren frowned. "Civilian." "Looks like it." They waited. Minutes passed. The woman disappeared inside. 2 armed men came out, talking, pointing toward the hills. One of them gestured, mimicking a rifle. "They know someone's watching," Wren said. "Maybe, or maybe they just feel watched." Her scope tracked the movement, each step, each gesture. Distance and stillness blurred into one quiet focus. The world beyond her scope ceased to exist. Then the radio clicked. Shaw's voice. "Target confirmed. Secondary HVT on site. Keller, you've got green light." Brin's finger settled on the trigger, but she didn't fire. Something in her gut hesitated. The timing was wrong. The wind had shifted slightly, but that wasn't it. It was the door. The same woman had stepped out again, now closer to the target's line of movement. "Hold," she said quickly. "Wind calls clean, Keller," Wren murmured. "Not the wind." She kept her eye in the scope, heartbeat slow. The woman moved toward the water tank, exactly between her and the target. "She's in the line," Brin said quietly. "Copy, holding fire." The radio crackled again, command repeating the order. Shaw's voice was calm but firm. "Keller, window closing." She exhaled, the choice hanging heavy in the air. 1 second too long and the shot would be lost. 1 second too soon and an innocent woman would die. "Negative," she said finally. "No shot." Static, then silence. Seconds later, the woman stepped back into the house. The target reappeared near the vehicle, phone to his ear. Wren whispered, "Now." "Now." The rifle barked once, sharp and final. The man dropped clean, no collateral. Through her scope, Brin watched the woman return to the courtyard again, this time looking confused, scared, but alive. She lowered the rifle slowly. Wren exhaled. "Nice call." "Not everyone would have waited," she murmured. "Not everyone should pull the trigger either." They packed up in silence. Back at base, the debrief was short. Target confirmed, neutralized. No civilian casualties. Mission successful. But Shaw didn't dismiss her immediately. After the others left, he stayed back. "You disobeyed an order," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." "You know I should write that up." "Yes, sir." He studied her, eyes steady. "But I'm not going to." Brin didn't react. He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "You did what soldiers forget too often. You remembered why we do this. 1 second of hesitation for the right reason can save more than a perfect shot." Her voice was low. "Sometimes hesitation costs lives." He nodded. "And sometimes it saves the part of you worth living with afterward." She looked at him, unsure what to say. He continued, softer now. "Command doesn't see everything that happens out there, but I do. I've seen men pull triggers because it was easier than thinking. You didn't. That matters." She swallowed hard, emotion tightening her chest. "I just didn't want to add another name I couldn't forget." He nodded once. "Then don't. You did right." For the first time since she'd arrived, Brin felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not relief, but a small measure of forgiveness. Days passed. Missions came and went. Word spread quietly about the shot that saved a civilian. Among soldiers, stories warped fast, growing their own legends. Some called it luck, others called it intuition. But those who'd been there, Shaw, Wren, and the team, called it discipline. Discipline born from years of silence and restraint. At night, Brin sat outside her tent, watching the stars drift above the desert. Every one of them felt older than war, older than the noise of men. She thought of Wyoming again, the black sky, the clean cold, her grandfather's voice. "You can't unpull a trigger, Brin. You can only decide when it's worth it." She closed her eyes. The wind brushed her cheek, dry and soft like an old friend. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. But peace, she knew, never lasted long. The next morning she was summoned to command. Shaw stood waiting, arms crossed. "We've got new orders. Joint operation Army and SEALs. Hire wants both branches on site." Her stomach sank slightly. "Army." He nodded. "Command sending a liaison, Captain Eric Dominic." The name hit her like a static shock. Of all the officers in theater, it had to be him. Shaw noticed the flicker in her expression. "You know him?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "We've worked together." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "Doesn't matter. You're running Overwatch again. Let him run his mouth, you run the mission." She smiled faintly. "Understood." That afternoon, Dominic arrived polished as ever, his uniform sharp even in the dust. He gave her a curt nod. "Keller." "Captain." His tone carried that same faint arrogance she remembered. "Heard you've been busy. I suppose you've learned a few things since I last offered to teach you." She didn't rise to it, just checked her scope, her tone flat. "A few, sir." Shaw walked in before the tension could build. "Good, everyone's acquainted. Briefing in 10. Brin exhaled slowly. This time he'll see for himself, she thought. But deep down, she didn't care about proving him wrong anymore. She cared about doing her job right. Still, when she caught him glancing at her rifle like it was decoration, she couldn't help the faint, ironic smile that crept across her lips. Because tomorrow, when the operation began, when the shot mattered most, there wouldn't be room for arrogance or doubt. There would only be the wind, the distance, and truth. And truth, she knew, didn't need anyone's permission to speak. Why did the air feel heavier that morning? The sun hadn't risen yet, but the world already buzzed with tension. Inside the operations tent, the low hum of radios mixed with the sound of maps being unrolled and markers squeaking against plastic. Captain Dominic stood at the head of the table, chin high, trying to project command. Across from him, Brin Keller quietly adjusted the dope sheet in her notebook, her expression unreadable. The mission was simple on paper. A joint tasking to interdict a convoy believed to be carrying the last of Haqqani's lieutenants out of the province. 2 vehicles, 3 targets, 1 narrow window of movement before they disappeared into Pakistan. But simple missions had a way of turning into ghosts, predictable until they were. Dominic's voice cut through the room. "SEALs will secure the northern perimeter. Army element covers the southern approach. Keller, you'll provide overwatch from the ridgeline here." He tapped the map, his tone careful, rehearsed. "Any questions?" There were none. Still, he looked at her longer than necessary, maybe to remind himself who she was, maybe to prove he wasn't intimidated. "Sergeant Keller," he said finally, "think you can handle the distance?" Wren's head turned sharply, but Brin didn't rise to it. She only nodded. "I'll manage, sir." Dominic smiled thinly. "Good. Wouldn't want to waste another opportunity for you to learn something." Captain Shaw stepped forward before the silence could curdle. "We step off at 400, he said firmly. "Weather window, tight. Let's keep egos out of this." The jab was subtle but sharp enough. Dominic's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. The briefing dissolved into movement, gear checks, ammo counts, silent routines that soldiers trusted more than speeches. Brin slipped outside into the early morning darkness, the cold air biting her lungs. She looked east, where the first faint trace of light glowed behind the hills. A new day, another shot waiting to be taken. The convoy rolled out before sunrise. 2 Humvees, 1 ATV, the same dust-covered dance they'd all done 100 times before. Brin rode in the back seat, helmet visor down, her M2010 cradled across her knees. Wren sat beside her, flipping through the weather report. "Pressure's dropping," he muttered. "Might get wind shears by mid-morning. Then we'll shoot before then." He grinned. "You make it sound easy." "It's not, that's why we're here." They reached the drop point an hour later, a rocky rise overlooking the valley road where the target convoy was expected to pass. Brin and Wren dismounted first, moving uphill under the fatting cover of darkness. The ridgeline was rough, loose rock underfoot, the kind that punished every careless step. When they reached the top, she dropped prone, exhaling slow. From up here the world looked small. The valley stretched out like a shallow scar, and in the distance she could see the faint glint of movement, vehicles on the move, headlights off, engines low. "Range," she whispered. Wren checked his laser designator. 1620. "They're moving slow. If they stay that speed, we've got maybe 90 seconds of window before they're under cover again." "Copy." Below, the SEAL team and Army detachment positioned along the approach. Brin could see them only as flickers of shadow through her scope. Dominic was somewhere down there too, no doubt watching his plan unfold from a safe distance behind cover. The radio hissed softly. Shaw's voice came through, calm and precise. "Viper 2-1, this is Nomad Actual. You're green on engagement. Confirm visual." "Visual confirmed," she said. "Targets in convoy, primary vehicle is middle truck, passenger side seat. Confirm when ready." Brin steadied her breath. Through her scope she tracked the convoy's slow crawl, the dust clouds rising behind them, the way the tires cut uneven lines in the dirt. The middle vehicle rolled into view, a white Toyota Hilux coated in grime. Through the windshield, 2 silhouettes. Front passenger held something metallic, maybe a weapon, maybe just habit. Hard to tell. "Target acquired," she whispered. "Wind steady at 2 left, range 1620. Wren adjusted the spotting scope. "Correction 15 left, mirage shifting. It's warming fast." She made the correction, breathing out until her lungs emptied completely. The world slowed, narrowing into the glass and crosshairs. She could hear her pulse, the faint crackle of the radio and nothing else. "Send it when ready," Wren said softly. She fired. The rifle cracked once, sharp and clean. The recoil rolled through her shoulder, absorbed by years of muscle memory. 3 seconds later the bullet found its mark. Through the scope, she saw the passenger collapse sideways, blood mist catching sunlight for a fraction of a heartbeat. The vehicle veered left, hit a rock and stalled. "Target down, confirmed," Wren said. Then everything exploded. From the rear vehicle, gunfire erupted, heavy, chaotic. A machine gun opened up toward the southern hill. Brin adjusted instantly, shifting aim. "Contact rear truck, 2 dismounts." "Range," Wren called. 1400, wind 25 right. She fired again. 1 dropped. Another darted behind the vehicle, weapon flashing. Shaw's voice came through the radio tight, taking fire from secondary, suppress and clear. Brin didn't hesitate. She cycled the bolt, recentered, waited for the second man to lean out. A fraction of movement was all she needed. She squeezed. The shot cracked through the rising dust. The second man dropped hard. The return fire ceased almost immediately. Wren looked up from the scope, exhaling. Both down, clean hits. Brin stayed in the scope, scanning for more movement. Nothing. Just the faint shimmer of heat rising from the valley floor. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and dust. Then the radio crackled again. Dominic's voice strained. "We've got one wounded down here. Need overwatch on the ridge east. I can't see them." "Negative," Brin said. "You're clear, enemy neutralized." A pause, then copy that. His tone was different this time. No sarcasm, no arrogance. Just the quiet disbelief of a man forced to confront reality. Hours later, back at base, the after-action report was already being written. Brin sat outside her tent, cleaning the rifle in the fading light. The desert wind was softer now, carrying the smell of distant rain. Across the compound, Wren was laughing with a few seals, reenacting the mission with exaggerated gestures. They looked her way and raised a hand in salute. She nodded, smiling faintly. Then Shaw approached. "You okay?" "Fine, sir." He sat beside her on the sandbag wall, setting his coffee down. Dominic filed his debrief already. Guess what he said? She didn't look up. "Something gracious, I'm sure." He chuckled. "Actually, yeah. Said you saved his team from walking into a kill zone. Called your overwatch precision exemplary." Brin raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Really, I think humility finally hit him." She smiled slightly. "That's a first." Shaw grew quiet, studying her face. "You ever think about what happens after this rotation? You could pick your next post. Instructor, maybe. Schoolhouse work. You've earned that." She shook her head. "Teaching, not for me." He smiled knowingly. "Says the woman who taught a SEAL unit how to breathe under fire." "Accident," she said softly. "No," he replied. "Legacy." She didn't answer. She looked toward the horizon instead, where the sky was melting into amber and gray. For the first time, the thought of leaving didn't scare her. Maybe because she finally knew that even if she walked away, her silence had already spoken loud enough. The following day, Dominic approached her outside the armory. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. She straightened slightly, waiting for whatever lecture or subtle insult was coming. Instead, he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "Sir." "I was wrong about you." He looked down, then met her eyes again. "When I told you I could teach you to shoot, I didn't understand what kind of shooter you were, what kind of soldier." She said nothing, just watched him, her face unreadable. He continued, his voice low. "You didn't just hit targets out there, you kept us alive. You saw things I didn't even think to look for. That's not something you can teach." For a long time she didn't reply. Then she said simply, "It's never been about proving anything, Captain. It's just about doing it right." He nodded. "Well, you did it right." Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, wind tugging at her sleeve, a strange quiet in her chest. Forgiveness, maybe, or closure, she couldn't tell. Wren appeared beside her, smirking. Did the great Captain Dominic just eat humble pie? "Looks that way." "Good for him, better for you." She smiled faintly. "I didn't need him to see it. I just needed the work to speak for itself." That evening, as the sun bled across the sky, Shaw called her into his office one last time. A small envelope sat on his desk. "What's this?" she asked. "Your commendation packet. Bronze Star recommendation. Official this time." She stared at it for a moment. "You didn't have to." "I didn't," he said. "You earned it." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, sir." He smiled softly. "You know, I think your grandfather would have been proud." She froze. "How do you?" "I read your background. The Marine sniper from Chasen. 14 confirmed right. She nodded slowly. Shaw's eyes softened. Different war, different century, but same lesson. Sometimes the quietest ones carry the heaviest truths. Brin looked down at her hands, at the faint oil stains, the small scars that mapped her years. He used to say the best snipers are the ones nobody sees coming. Shaw nodded. He was right. Later that night, alone in her tent, Brin unfolded the old paper again. The pencil marks were almost gone, the number barely visible now. 14. She laid it beside her new commendation, the contrast almost poetic, one a whisper from the past, the other an echo from the present. She smiled softly. Guess it's our number now, Grandpa, 43. The wind outside rustled the tent flaps, the same rhythm she'd heard 100 nights before. But this time it didn't sound like emptiness. It sounded like peace. She lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling, feeling the soft hum of the bass fade around her. Her eyes closed slowly. Maybe tomorrow she'd think about what came next, Wyoming, maybe teaching, maybe something else entirely. But for now, she let the silence settle around her like a blanket. Because sometimes, the loudest thing a soldier could do was say nothing at all. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It just breathes. Why did silence feel louder at home? The airport was full of noise, luggage wheels, crying bobbies, muffled announcements. Yet Brin Keller heard none of it. Her boots hit the polished floor with the mechanical rhythm of someone still listening for explosions that never came. She carried one duffel bag, one rifle case, and a mind she wasn't sure she recognized anymore. People clapped when soldiers walked past them. Some even said thank you. Brin smiled when it happened, polite, detached, but it never reached her eyes. Gratitude was easy. Understanding was rare. Outside, Wyoming air hit her like a memory. Cold, clean, endless. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and distance. For a moment she closed her eyes. The weight on her chest eased, not gone, but softened. The ranch was exactly as she'd left it. Weathered fence lines, faded red barn, grass moving like waves across the plain. The house creaked when she opened the door. Dust had settled in the corners, on the photo frames, on the same table where her grandfather used to clean his garand. She set the rifle case down, then her duffel. The quiet pressed in. For a long while she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the empty chair by the window. The chair where her grandfather had sat every evening, oiling his rifle, telling stories he never finished. Stories about Chasen, about snow and silence and men who didn't come back. Now she understood those silences better than he ever could have explained them. She unpacked slowly. The Garen's paper 14th kill, she pinned it to the wall above her cot. Beside it, her bronze star citation. 2 lives side by side. The man who'd taught her patience and the war that had demanded it from her all over again. For the first time in years, she slept without boots by the door. Days blurred into each other. Morning coffee, fence repairs, long walks down the ridge. The rhythm should have been peaceful. It was. Something inside her had been tuned too tightly for too long. She still woke before dawn, still found herself scanning horizons, still held her breath when the wind changed direction. Some nights she'd walk out behind the barn, lay on her back and stare at the stars. The same constellations she'd seen over Helmand. Same patterns. Same cold beauty. Only now no drone hum overhead. No radios, just her heartbeat and the low whisper of wind. But peace, she learned, was its own kind of noise. A noise that demanded she listen to everything she'd tried to forget. She thought about Captain Shaw, the man who'd trusted her when no one else did. About Wren with his dry humor and sharp eyes. And about Dominic, the officer who'd once told her, "Let me teach you to shoot." She smiled faintly at that memory now, not with bitterness, but with something close to pity, because arrogance ages poorly in the face of truth. She took the old Garand from the rack one evening and cleaned it slowly. The smell of gun oil filled the room, familiar, comforting, the same smell from her childhood. She ran her hand along the barrel, whispering, "You were right, Grandpa. Silence wins every time." A car crunched on the gravel outside. She froze. Visitors were rare out here. She set the rifle down and stepped onto the porch. A man stepped out of a rental SUV. Civilian clothes, but his bearing gave him away instantly. Shoulders squared, eyes scanning even when relaxed. "Staff Sergeant Keller," he called. She nodded, "Not anymore." He smiled faintly. "Old habits. I'm from Fort Benning, Army Sniper School. We've been trying to reach you for months." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He hesitated, then said, "Captain Vincent Shaw sent a recommendation before he rotated stateside. He said, and I quote, 'If you want to teach precision, teach her.'" Brin folded her arms. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes, ma'am. Instructor position. Advanced marksmanship program. You train the next generation. Pays good. Hours are yours. Thought you might be interested." She looked past him, out across the field. The wind had picked up again, moving the tall grass in gentle waves. She could hear her grandfather's voice in her mind. "Pass it on when you're ready." But readiness was complicated. Teaching meant talking. Talking meant remembering. She turned back. "I'll think about it." He handed her a card. "Take your time, you've earned that." When he left, she stood on the porch a long time, card in hand, watching the dust trail disappear into the horizon. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the card beside her coffee mug. The house creaked softly, the old wood breathing around her. She opened her Bronze Star citation, reread the lines she'd never quite believed. Her professionalism, technical skill, and composure under pressure directly prevented a high-risk ground assault and eliminated a high-value target. She'd read it before, but tonight, the words felt heavier. She thought of all the people whose stories didn't end with medals. Ortiz, the ranger spotter from Kandahar who'd submitted her first citation that got buried in red tape. Men who'd seen her work but whose words hadn't carried enough weight to prove it. She picked up the phone twice before setting it back down. Around midnight, she finally dialed the number on the card. A voice answered. "Fort Benning Marksmanship, this is Reynolds." "This is Brin Keller," she said quietly, "about that instructor position." The man sounded alert now. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Shaw said you might call. We'd be honored to have you." She took a breath. "When do you need me?" "Orientation, in 2 weeks. No rush, we'll make it work around your schedule." "I'll be there." 2 weeks later, she stood on the long firing line at Fort Benning, the morning air crisp and still. Rows of shooters lay prone in front of her, young faces behind optics, rifles gleaming in the sun. Some wore nervous smiles, others focused determination. She recognized the look in all of them, the mix of fear and pride that came before the first real shot. Reynolds, the range officer, nodded toward her. "They're yours." She stepped forward, her voice steady but quiet. "Listen up." The chatter died instantly. "You'll hear a lot of people tell you shooting is about confidence," she began. "It's not. Confidence doesn't make a bullet fly straight. Patience does, precision does, listening does." A few recruits shifted uneasily. She continued, her tone calm, deliberate. "When I was your age, I thought the same way. That hitting a target made me good. That numbers meant something, but numbers fade. What doesn't fade is how you handle the silence before the shot. That's where you live or die, not out there," she gestured toward the targets, "but in here." She tapped her temple. "And here," her chest. The recruits nodded, silent now. "Every rifle you touch is a promise," she said. "Keep it, and don't ever let arrogance aim for you." When she finished, there was a long pause. Then one of the students, a young woman near the center, raised her hand. "Ma'am, how long have you been shooting?" Brin smiled faintly. "Since before you were born." Laughter rippled lightly through the line, breaking the tension. She smiled too, genuine this time. As the weeks passed, she found herself changing in small ways. The nightmares faded. The restless scanning slowed. The silence at home began to sound less like loneliness and more like peace. She taught wind reading, breathing discipline, range estimation. But she also taught something harder, restraint. How to not take a shot. How to measure the moral weight of pulling a trigger. Some of the younger soldiers didn't understand it yet, but she saw the ones who did, the ones who listened quietly, who didn't talk just to fill space. She recognized herself in them. One afternoon, a cadet lingered after class, a tall kid with freckles and nervous eyes. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "is it true what they say, that you made a shot at 1,800 meters in Helmand?" She looked at him surprised. "Where'd you hear that?" "Everyone here talks about it, says you're a legend." She smiled softly. Legends are just stories people tell when they don't understand silence. The boy blinked. "I don't get it." "Good," she said gently. "You're not supposed to, not yet." He nodded, unsure but grateful. When he walked away, she stood there a while, watching the wind ripple through the paper targets. Each hole told a story, just like scars, evidence of trying, failing, learning. Maybe that was the real legacy, not perfection but persistence. That night she visited the memorial wall near the training grounds. Dozens of names etched in metal, some she recognized. Ortiz, Wren, and at the bottom, newly added Captain Vincent Shaw. A quiet ache bloomed in her chest. She traced his name with her fingers, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said silence wins. Guess you were right." The stars overhead looked the same as they had in Afghanistan, cold, beautiful, distant. But they didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt honest. She took the folded paper from her pocket one last time. The number was barely visible now. She placed it beneath the wall, weighted with a small stone. 14 and 43, she said softly. "We're done counting now." The wind carried the words away. She turned back toward the barracks, the moonlight catching her silhouette against the dark. Not a hero, not a legend, just a soldier who'd learned what it meant to live with quiet purpose. Because sometimes victory doesn't shout. Sometimes it just breathes steady and lets the world keep turning. Why did the gunfire sound different this time? It wasn't on a battlefield. It was training day at Fort Benning, blue sky, clean lines, perfectly measured distances. But when the first rifle cracked downrange, Brin Keller's chest tightened. Not fear, memory. "Cease fire," she called, her voice slicing through the air. The shooters froze, rifles lowering, bolts open. Dust hung in the heat like suspended breath. She walked the line slowly, checking chambers, reading the small tells, shoulders too tense, grips too tight, the kind of things only veterans noticed. "Nice groups," she murmured to one trainee. "Watch your trigger reset, don't fight the rifle." The young man nodded, sweat streaking his face. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled faintly, clapping his shoulder once before moving on. She'd gotten good at that, the calm instructor tone, firm but not hard, authority without threat. But beneath it all, a quiet hum still lived in her. The hum of war. It never really stopped. At the far end of the range, a group of officers watched. She could feel their eyes, but she ignored them. They'd been hovering more lately, brass from command evaluating her program, whispering about expansion. Maybe they wanted to turn patience into curriculum. Maybe they just wanted a success story to put in a brochure. Either way, she taught the same way she'd lived, slow, quiet, deliberate. After the last round of firing, she called for weapons clear and signaled the trainees to the shade. She poured herself water from a canteen and leaned against the concrete bench, eyes closing for a moment. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Reynolds asked, the range officer who'd first recruited her. She nodded, "Just hot." He smiled. "You've been running this program for 6 months straight. You can take a day off, you know." "Maybe," she said, "but patience rusts if you leave it alone too long." He chuckled. That sounds like something Captain Shaw would have said. Her eyes opened. The mention of Shaw hit her like a soft bruise. Yeah, probably. Later that afternoon, she stood in her small office at the range complex, sorting through training reports. Her window looked out toward the far hills, green, quiet, nothing like Helmand. But her body still moved like it expected mortars. The stillness didn't fool her. A knock on the door. "Come in." A young woman stepped inside, short, pale, nervous. Brin recognized her immediately. Private Ellen Riggs, 18 years old, the one who asked too many questions in class but always listened twice as hard to the answers. "Ma'am," Riggs said, standing stiff, "you asked to see me." Brin gestured to the chair. "Relax, sit." The girl obeyed, awkward and tense. Brin slid a paper toward her, a shooting report. "You've improved. 200-meter groupings are consistent, but your breathing cycle's off." Riggs frowned. "Off. You're holding your breath too long, makes the shot wobble. Don't fight your lungs. Let them teach you timing." Riggs nodded. "Yes, ma'am, it's just sometimes I get scared I'll miss." Brin studied her for a moment. "What's your background?" "Farm kid from Iowa. Never shot anything bigger than a .22 until I got here." Brin smiled faintly. "Then you're ahead of half the people I trained with." That made Riggs laugh nervously. "Did you ever, miss?" Brin leaned back. "Everyone misses, sometimes the target, sometimes the point." The girl looked confused, but she didn't ask again. Brin could tell she was one of the good ones, too sincere for war, too brave to say no to it. As Riggs stood to leave, Brin said quietly, "When you're behind a rifle, remember this, it's not about killing. It's about clarity. Every good shot is a question answered." Riggs paused, processing that. "Yes, ma'am." After she left, Brin sat in the silence a long time. Her own words lingered in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Every good shot is a question answered. Then why did she still have so many questions? 2 weeks later, the first live-fire field exercise began. It was supposed to be routine: 4 students, 2 instructors, rural training ground 40 miles outside the base. Controlled environment, perfect safety record. But control, like calm, was an illusion. The convoy reached the site by noon. Brin rode in the lead truck, map on her knee, the sky a deep, flawless blue overhead. She'd always liked the smell of pine out here. It didn't smell like war. They set up the firing line facing a distant ridge. Safety checks complete, targets confirmed, everything precise. Riggs was on lane 3. Brin crouched beside her, scanning her setup. "All right, Riggs, remember what we talked about. Relax your shoulders. Let the rifle do the work." "Yes, ma'am." Riggs exhaled, pressed cheek to stock, finger hovering. The wind shifted softly, brushing dust across the range. Then a sharp foreign crack, not from the line, from the tree line. Brin's instincts snapped alive before her mind caught up. "Cease fire," she shouted. Another shot, closer. Bark splintered off a tree beside lane 2. Everyone down, weapons safe. Her students dropped flat. Brin's hand found her sidearm automatically, her eyes scanning the ridge. Years of combat conditioning came roaring back like it had just been waiting for permission. Her pulse slowed, not sped up. Breathing leveled. The world shrank to angles and sound. "Direction," Reynolds called, crouching beside the truck. "Northwest ridge," she said instantly. "Single shooter, maybe 2, high ground advantage." He blinked. "How can you tell?" She didn't answer. She could hear it, the echo, the delay between report and impact. Old instincts woke like muscle memory. Another crack. A round pinged off the truck hood. Her body moved before thought. She grabbed Riggs by the collar, pulling her behind the engine block. "Stay down." "Who was that?" Riggs gasped. "I don't know, doesn't matter, we end it." Reynolds shouted into the radio for base security. "Response time, 15 minutes. Too long." Brin scanned the terrain. She could see the shimmer of heat near the far ridge, a glint of metal sunlight catching off optics. "There," she whispered. "Can you hit that from here?" Reynolds asked. She didn't answer, just took Riggs' rifle clean barrel sighted for 600 meters. She adjusted the scope, breathing slow. "Not ideal," she murmured, "but we'll see." She lay prone beside the truck, body aligning with the ground like she'd never stopped being that quiet shadow in the dust. Through the scope a figure, movement, camouflage, civilian, no, too precise. Mercenary maybe, some contractor gone rogue scavenging from the range boundary. She didn't think, didn't plan, she became the distance. "Wind 3 right," she muttered. "Elevation no correction." Riggs watched, frozen. Brin exhaled, squeezed, and the rifle barked. 3 seconds later the figure dropped, clean, silent, final. The valley went still again, birds scattered from the trees. The echo died. Reynolds exhaled shakily. "Holy hell, Keller, that was." "Reflex," she said quietly, lowering the rifle. Her voice trembled only slightly. "Check for secondary." He scanned through binoculars. Nothing, one shooter. Looks like he had stolen base ammo. Jesus. Riggs whispered, "You saved us." Brin looked at her. The girl's eyes were wide, not with fear but awe. The kind she'd seen before, the kind that turned soldiers into myths. "No," Brin said softly. "I just ended something before it started." The girl didn't understand. She wasn't supposed to. Later, when the MPs finished their reports, the story started spreading through the base. Instructor Keller neutralizes live fire threat at 800 meters. Some called her a hero. Others called it fate. Brin didn't call it anything. She couldn't sleep that night. The old hum was back, louder than before. Every sound in the dark felt like memory replayed. The shot, the silence after, the stillness that followed death. The next morning she walked into her classroom and found Riggs waiting. The young soldier stood straight, hands clasped behind her back. "Permission to speak, ma'am." "Go ahead." Riggs hesitated, then said, "I watched you yesterday. How calm you were, how fast. I want to be like that." Brin looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "No, Riggs, you don't." The girl blinked, but "Calm isn't always peace," Brin said quietly. "Sometimes it's just what's left after too much noise." Riggs swallowed. "You're saying it's bad to be good." "I'm saying it's dangerous to forget what it costs." Riggs nodded slowly. "I think I understand." Brin smiled faintly. "Someday you will." That evening she drove back to the ranch. The sunset stretched endless over the plains, turning the grass into liquid gold. She parked beside the old fence, stepped out and breathed deep. The air smelled of dust and pine and rain. She sat on the porch, the Garin across her knees, and watched the sky fade into night. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled soft, distant. She smiled. "You'd laugh if you saw me now, Grandpa," she whispered, "teaching patience to kids who don't even know what silence costs." The wind answered in the only way it knew, through the soft rustle of grass and the creak of the porch boards. Her phone buzzed beside her. Message from Reynolds. "HQ approved your permanent instructor appointment. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant." She set it down, looking out across the fading horizon. Permanent. The word used to scare her. Now it just felt earned. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the quiet fill her again. Not the heavy kind, not the silence of waiting for death, but the kind that follows understanding. Because maybe peace wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you learned how to keep. Why did she feel nervous again? After everything she'd seen, everything she'd survived, the idea of standing on a stage in front of people shouldn't have shaken her hands. But it did. The small auditorium at Fort Benning was filled with recruits, instructors, and brass. A new graduating class of Army snipers waited in pressed uniforms, rifles slung ceremonial across their chests. At the back of the room hung a banner, "Precision is patience." She hadn't chosen the slogan, but she smiled at it anyway. It was close enough to what she believed. Reynolds stood at the podium calling names. One by one, the students crossed the stage to shake hands and receive their certificates. Brin waited near the side, watching. Riggs was in the front row. The kid looked sharp, older somehow, the nervous energy replaced by quiet steadiness. When the ceremony ended, Reynolds gestured to her. "Before we dismiss," he said, "Instructor Keller has a few words." Applause rippled through the room. She stepped up to the microphone, eyes sweeping the crowd. The lights were too bright, but she didn't mind. The brightness felt honest. "I'm not much for speeches," she began. "You've already had plenty of those, so I'll just tell you one story." The room quieted. "When I was 21, I joined thinking precision was about hitting the target. I thought it was about proving something to myself, to the people who didn't believe I belonged there. But years later, lying behind a rifle halfway across the world, I learned it's not about that at all. Precision isn't pride. It's patience. It's listening long enough for truth to show itself." She let the words settle. The recruits were still watching her. "You'll all hear stories about perfect shots, long kills, record distances. They make good headlines. But the truth is, what matters most is what you choose not to shoot. The moment you decide to wait, that's what separates skill from wisdom." Her throat tightened. "Some of you will carry that choice with you for the rest of your lives. And when you do, remember this: silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the only strength that keeps you human." She paused, forcing herself to breathe. "That's all I've got. Congratulations. You've earned your rifles. Now earn your peace." Applause rose, not loud, not wild, but warm. The kind that came from understanding. Riggs was first to stand. She clapped, eyes bright. Around her, others followed. For the first time in years, Brin didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel seen through either, just seen. After the ceremony, Riggs found her outside under the awning. Rain had started, thin drops tapping the concrete like slow applause. "Ma'am," she said, holding her diploma tight, "you said once every good shot is a question answered. I think I finally understand what you meant." Brin smiled. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am. It's not about the bullet. It's about the pause before it." Brin nodded. "Then you're ready." Riggs hesitated, then asked, "What about you? Are you done asking questions?" The older woman looked toward the horizon. The air smelled of wet earth and gun oil, the scent of beginnings and endings mixed together. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe I'm just learning to live with the ones that don't have answers." They stood in silence a long while, rain collecting on their sleeves. Then Riggs said, "They want you to write the new manual. Base Command says your methods are changing the way they train." Brin chuckled. "Manuals are fine, but you can't teach conscience in a checklist." Riggs grinned. "Still, it'd be nice to see your name in print." "Names fade," Brin said gently. "Lessons don't." Weeks passed. The range quieted after graduation. Summer thickened the air. Cicadas hummed like static. Brin stayed late most nights, cleaning rifles, checking targets, keeping her mind busy. She'd grown used to the rhythm: teach, clean, think, repeat. The simplicity kept the ghosts manageable. One evening, while packing up targets, she found a small box on her desk. No note, just her name written in precise block letters. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a single brass casing, polished to a dull shine. The paper read, "From the first student you ever told to wait for the wind. Thank you for teaching me silence." It wasn't signed, but she didn't need it to be. Riggs, of course. She turned the casing over in her fingers. It was empty, harmless now. She smiled. Maybe that was the point. She set it beside her bronze star and her grandfather's faded slip of paper. The three sat together: war, legacy, and peace. 3 lives connected by the same heartbeat. That night she drove out past the training fields, farther than regulations allowed. The road wound through pine and open grass, ending at a small overlook that faced the Chattahoochee River. She parked, stepped out, and listened. Frogs croaked somewhere near the water. Wind moved through the trees. No gunfire, no engines, just the slow rhythm of the world existing without permission. She laid a blanket on the ground and sat, the rifle case beside her, not for comfort, but because it felt wrong to be without it. She opened it, removed the rifle, and rested it across her knees. "Funny," she whispered, "how something made for death can teach you so much about stillness." The stars came out one by one, faint behind a veil of clouds. She thought of Shaw again, his quiet faith, his patience with her anger. Thought of Wren, whose humor had kept her sane on too many ridges. And her grandfather who'd said, "The best snipers are the ones nobody sees coming." She laughed softly. "Guess you were right, nobody saw this coming." Her phone buzzed, a text from Reynolds. "Next week's orientation is full. You up for another cycle?" She typed back, "Always." Then she set the phone aside and looked back at the river. The surface caught the moonlight, breaking it into pieces. It reminded her of something Shaw had once told her. Reflection only exists because of light and distance. You need both. Maybe that was what she'd been chasing all along, distance enough to see herself clearly. The following morning she returned to base early. Fog rolled across the range, soft and white, mooting the world. Her students would arrive in an hour. For now, it was just her and the wind. She walked down the firing line, boots crunching on gravel, stopping at each lane like a ritual. At the last station, she knelt and picked up a fallen brass shell, still warm from yesterday's sun. She turned it in her fingers, whispering, "Everything ends where it began." A voice behind her broke the quiet. "Morning, ma'am." She turned. Riggs again, now promoted, instructor patch on her sleeve. "Morning, Sergeant," Brin said, smiling. "They asked me to assist this cycle." "Good. You ready to yell at kids who think patience is optional?" Riggs grinned. "Learned from the best." Brin handed her the brass casing. "Then this belongs to you now. First lesson, keep your silence close. It'll save you when words can't." Riggs took it carefully, eyes shining. "Yes, ma'am." As the sun broke through the fog, they stood side by side, watching the light spill across the range. Rows of targets waited in the distance, clean, white, full of promise. Brin closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in. The smell of dew, metal, and earth. Home. When the students arrived, she gave the same briefing she always did, but something felt different this time. Lighter. Maybe because the voice beside her now carried part of the weight. "Eyes on your targets," she said, "but never forget what's behind them." Riggs echoed softly, "Patience before precision." Brin nodded, "Exactly." The sound of bolts racking echoed down the line. Then, one by one, rifles fired. Sharp, steady. Music made of purpose. She watched them shoot, each student learning rhythm, restraint, breathing. Each shot followed by silence long enough to mean something. The smoke drifted, curling upward. The range smelled of burnt powder and sunlight. Brin felt a strange calm spread through her chest, a peace that didn't demand explanation. When the last shot rang out, she whispered to herself, "That's enough." That evening back at the ranch, she sat on the porch again, the same chair, the same sky. Only now her heart didn't race at every sound. The silence felt earned. She opened her notebook, the old data book she'd carried across continents. The pages were worn, the ink fatting. At the bottom of the last page, she wrote one more line in careful script. Lesson 37. Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take. She closed the book, exhaled, and smiled. The horizon glowed orange, wind rolling across the field like slow applause. In the distance, a coyote called. Another answered, then stillness. Brin leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath her. Her eyes drifted to the paper on the wall. Her grandfather's penciled 14, barely visible now, but still there. She whispered, "We did all right, old man." The wind lifted, tugging her hair, carrying her words into the fading light. And somewhere between sound and silence, between the war she left and the peace she found, the quiet finally felt like home. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just breathes. Steady. Unbroken. Alive.